So welcome everyone. Welcome back. Welcome if it's your first time to our webinar. We have with us Dr. Tymofii Brik from the Kyiv School of Economics. As many of you probably already know from the email communications, Dr. Brik is the rector of the University of the Kyiv School of Economics since 2022. He's been working at the Kyiv School of Economics since 2018. He's also in the past held the positions of head of sociological research at the Kyiv School of Economics Institute and vice president for international relations at the university. Dr. Brik has also been the national coordinator of the European Social Survey in Ukraine, which is a very large international comparative study conducted in most European countries since 2002. He is also the chairman of the think tank CEDOS Supervisory Board, the Center for the Study of Society. He's a member of the advisory board of Texty.org's Ratings Sellers Project and the advisory board of the research company Gratus. And Dr. Brik is one of the co-founders of Urban Space 500, a public restaurant in Kyiv, and publishes very extensively on a number of important topics that we'll touch on today. As you can tell from that short bio, he's very busy, so we're very grateful to have him here today and have a little bit of his time. What we normally start with is a general and somewhat personal question of how are you? So how are you doing amidst everything that's going on in Ukraine today?
Wow. Well, first of all, thank you for this very extensive introduction. I think it's kind of very typical now in Ukraine across all social groups and geographies. If you find some person who is doing something, most likely you will ask this person to do more and more and more projects. So it's kind of a burden of doing things is to get even more things on your shoulders. But it's common because in Ukraine we just we lack human capital. Yeah. So, but to answer to a question, I'm okay. I'm fine. Thanks. I answer to this question differently every day. I just had a very long day back at the university. We're working towards our annual board of directors review, which means, a lot of work. But yesterday we had a concert with piano in our university, which was fun. And today I'm back at home together with my wife and my daughter. So even during the wartime, you can still be okay with your family. So I guess I'm okay.
It's striking that, I mean, that in some ways that sounds like a very sort of busy, normal university kind of life and day, and in other ways, I imagine it's not.
It's
Um,
crazy, yeah. Just to give you a fun example, a couple of weeks ago, we received a message that our university was bombed, like we have a bomb in the university, which was just a spam. Many universities and governmental offices received this email. And according to the procedure, we had to call the police and everything, and we had to move our classes and events, but we did not postpone anything. We just had to reschedule and move things around. And we have some friends in the neighborhood calling like, hey, can you give us some office space to run these events? So that's just a regular day, you just have another email and you have to rearrange everything. And we do it every day. Yeah.
that's remarkable that you just get an email about a bomb and you're just, it's a matter of,
Yeah. And then it
it's
means
sort
that
of,
your
yeah,
research workshop has to be moved for 30 minutes in another building. Yeah.
right,
And you go
right.
there and just keep presenting some, data and papers. Yeah.
It's sort of daily life as resistance almost is what I hear. That sort of you just keep going with
Yeah.
with regularly scheduled things, but just pivoting constantly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so the other question that we always start with for our guests is what does victory for Ukraine mean for you?
Uh, it's a very complicated question. For me, it's about justice. It's difficult to define justice. I have a very high standards and high expectation from this word. For me, it's not just when, people do not fight anymore. It's not ceasefire. It's not stopping bombs and airplanes. Justice for me is to, getting back things that have to be normal, like getting back the territories. but also getting the reparations from Russia, put the responsible those who are responsible in jail and criminal court, international criminal court, but also, just an apology. It might be weird, but you'd be surprised how Russian society seems to be indifferent. And, just I really want to see people to understand what's happening, to take sincere responsibility and just to say, we are sorry for what we did. And I take this kind of post-war German model when the society had to rebuild, reshape it, to incorporate the knowledge about the war into the educational system and in public culture, so people might have this genuine understanding, like, oh, we did a really bad thing, and we sincerely apologize for that. I don't see that. I don't think that we will see it in our lifetime, but maybe our children, grandchildren will see. So to me, the justice is important. And I think the victory of Ukraine is at least, getting back the territories and reparations, at most, criminal justice and societal justice.
No. And you've highlighted, I mean, and in saying that, I mean, that this is, it sounds like for you, true victory for Ukraine is realistically sort of a thing that's going to take decades to accomplish, in
Well,
terms
with
of the
this
potential for
definition,
apologies, reconstruction
yeah,
and building, reparations, if those happen.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Well, my definition is very broad, and it's difficult to achieve this kind of justice. I think realistically, if you talk to international experts, experts in military and politics, it seems that, to be realist, some sort of ceasefire will happen eventually. Some sort of territorial, how to say it, bringing back territories can happen. Economic, you know, economic, how to say it, like bringing some resources back from Russia, and these things, they might happen. There are international mechanisms for that. There is international community is already working on that. The Russian assets were seized, and they're already included in the plans for World Bank and European Commission as a sort of a resource for future credits to Ukraine. So it's already happening. So I think these things are realistic, but regarding the real criminal justice and responsibility, I'm not sure about that. We still see that after Bosnia and after many other conflicts, a lot of people, they've never been jailed. Um, and the societal reconciliation, well, that will take a lot of time. Yeah.
right. And one thing that we wanted to ask you about in particular is where the sort of Ukrainian public is at, because of course you're an expert in a number of issues, but things like trust of the population, public opinion, and public beliefs about the war. You've done
Mhm.
a lot of academic work on this and a lot of survey work on it. So given that we're going into the third year of the war, people are talking about the end of it, but we still don't know when that will happen. One of the things that we really wanted to talk with you about is things like trust.
Yeah.
So citizens and how they're thinking about the Ukrainian government, who they trust in the government. Foreigners often, like Ukraine has um, often association with corruption, but we actually know that corruption's gotten much better over time and it's not nearly the level of concern that sometimes people have as a stereotype. But if we could start with trust, because I know you've done a lot of work on that. Who do people trust today?
Yeah, so let's put it in a context. Uh, in a larger historical context, we have data about it from the early 90s, from 1992 and onwards. And we know from many surveys and research that Ukraine has been defined or regarded as a low trust society. So Ukrainians have trusted very little into formal institutions from the early 90s. President, government, parliament, police, courts, lawyers. So, these things that you imagine when you hear government. Usually, in percentages, it can be from 5 to 20% of people would say that they trust these institutions. In terms of scale, is like 3 out of 10, sort of 4 out of 10. You know, it's somewhere below the average. At the same time, church, family, these were the two institutions that people placed trust in. And from these observations and some kind of statistical models, scholars used to say that Ukraine is a society with low formal trust, sort of because of negative experience of interacting with the state, because of the past in, you know, it is about the deep history, Soviet Union and detachment from the state, but also complicated economic transition in the 90s and then political turbulences in 2000s. Well, it made people very kind of indifferent or detached from formal institutions. But you have to trust someone. You have to interact with someone. You know, you work and live and love someone. So people used to place trust a lot in their inner circle of friends, family, and church seemed to be like this communal institution that kind of, you know, it served its purpose of being some societal role model, provider, and, you know, kind of something that substituted the state. So that was the history of Ukraine. And we know that occasionally the trust changed after the Orange Revolution, when after the President Yushchenko was elected, there was a spike in trust. People gave this benefit of the doubt, maybe, you know, let's trust now to the system. And then after a year and a half, the trust disappeared. And the usual story here is that, you know, it was about charismatic leader, some changes on the surface, but people need more than that. People need to have to experience change in their daily life, in their office, with their families, when they interact with police or the government. But things did not change on this fundamental level. And you know, today you trust charismatic politician, and tomorrow you don't trust charismatic politician, and it's up and downs. Especially when you have free media and political competition, it's very easy to pivot your attitude. At the same time, we observe that there was some small fundamental change at the level of local trust after Euromaidan. After Euromaidan, there was again the situation with a lot of benefit of the doubt, like, oh, maybe something gonna change. So people were a bit open-minded about changes in society. And there happened a fundamental reform called decentralization, which in law created these new amalgamated communities. And communities is like villages and towns coming together, saying like, we are a big entity now. And it changed everything. Taxes, more taxes retained in the level of community, gender quotas at the elections at the local level, allowing more females to participate, participatory budgets. Yeah, so things changed, and we see that there was a kind of increase in trust to local government, and it did not change. Sort of compared to the example of Orange Revolution, trust increased and declined. But with this local trust, it increased and it remained the same. And now we are in the invasion situation. When we saw the kind of rally around the flag effect, surprisingly, society placed a lot of trust into the president, parliament, government. All the formal institutions increased from 30% who trusted president to 90, then 80, then 60. It's crazy. You know, it was really crazy. But now, after 2.5 years of the invasion, it goes down again, back to the norm, quote unquote. It was 30 before the invasion. It is 30 now. But in between, the president enjoyed unprecedented trust. Now we can debate, you know, it was a rally around the flag effect and it lasted for 2.5 years. Maybe it just, you know, you cannot go higher than more than 2.5 years. Maybe there is a limit. Or maybe the presidential administration kind of, you know, they stop doing things that generate trust. We don't know this exactly. There are multiple reasons for trust to decline, but yeah, we see it declines. So right now, people keep trusting to local authorities at the moderate level, church and family at high level. And there are two additional institutions that emerged recently, and people trust them. They are military, army, which, it is the government, but I think people view it as some sort of independent body, like military is something else.
Mhm.
And also volunteers. People trust the volunteers a lot. And I think it's it's not formal institution, it's not the government, and volunteers, sometimes they're NGOs, sometimes they're individuals. So I would say it's an informal institute. And it is maybe the rare example when this new institute emerges out of the blue and receives such a high trust. And here we are. So
Yeah.
military, volunteers, family, church, they are still highly regarded. Local government, moderate level, president, parliament, everything else goes down.
So
And there was
yeah. Oh,
someone
go ahead.
wanted to ask a question, I think, but uh, I don't know. How do you are the moderator, so you can allow people to ask questions if you want, but
Well, and I didn't want to interrupt that because it's such a good explanation over time of how trust has evolved and where it is. And so I think it gives us an important context for understanding that. What I have to ask is if I were looking at this sort of without much knowledge of Ukraine, but if I were looking at it from the outside, how would you interpret after 2.5 years that there's declining trust? Because I can see what I would think of as a misinterpretation of this as Ukrainians are losing faith, right? Which is not what you're saying. But how do
yeah,
you interpret the sort of decline in trust in national institutions? And it sounds like at the local level, there's still moderate trust, which is not bad. Like you were saying, it's kind of returning to the norm of what it was, but there's some declining trust at the local level too, right?
yeah. So I see in the chat that the hand was accidental, so there is
Oh,
no urgency to answer this question.
oh, okay.
Uh, Look, there were also questions about West versus East. So in trust, usually we observe it's a universal phenomenon. So people
Hmm.
from different parts of Ukraine, they tend to have the same level of trust into local, national, and informal institutions. So that's why Ukrainian scholars, sociologists, often uh, well, it's difficult now there are so many debates. I don't want to go into it. But basically, a lot of people view trust as one of the manifestations of something else. So there is some universal phenomena, and we observe it through manifestations like trust. And it's something about culture. So it's in culture of Ukrainians to be more collectivistic when it comes to your family and friends. Like you really are, gather around your folks. It's also from other studies. We know that Ukrainians really, really have this social focus on taking care of others, like who belong in our circles. When during the pandemic, we had our own research about, questions about, are you afraid of pandemic? Why? What brings you fear and stress? And, people were not afraid of losing their job or losing their life. People were afraid for health of their relatives. So it's
Wow.
very common. So it's social.
Yeah.
It's about people in our circle. It's their well-being and health. And another thing what we know is security. So Ukrainians really, really value security among many other values. Here in Ukraine, it's often a political, ideological debate. People can say, well, valuing security is like so narrow-minded, and we have to be more, I don't know, we have to change our mentality and value other things, like be more creative and to explore opportunities and individualistic and capitalistic. So it's an ideological debate.
Mhm.
But The reality in the sociological data is that people value security, and we can, given the hindsight, we can interpret it that after so many years of Soviet Union repressions, economic transformations after the Soviet Union, pandemic, wars, of course, people value security because security is
Right.
scarce, and
Right.
people hold on to it. Yeah,
Yeah.
so that's why trust, I think, is also just a manifestation of this big story. We want security, we want to help our inner circle. So of course, it is important for us to trust someone who gained our trust, who can bring security to our family, like my
Right.
friend, my boss with whom I've been for many years, maybe the charismatic candidate because he looks like me and he wants to give me social benefits or something like that.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
so trust is just a manifestation of that mm, we need security and we care about others. And that's
Right.
why it's universal. West versus East, older generations versus younger generations, females and males, they have approximately the same level of trust. Yeah,
So
and
that's
your
interesting. That's not true in all countries that you see the same levels of trust across different age groups and different genders and
Yeah,
right.
often it's
Yeah.
socioeconomic or migrants versus non-migrants, or in some countries there is a political polarization, and
Right.
you can trust to the incumbent government, but you won't trust your opposition government. So in Ukraine, yeah. Oh, I will make a comment and then I will answer to your question
Yeah,
specifically.
we have some. Oh, do you see the questions in the Q&A already? So we have one about trust. We have another that we'll get
Yeah.
to Mikhail Filipov's question second. We have a couple, one about trust. I think you've answered Marta Schiffer's question. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I actually was going to ask you too, related to you talked about how Ukrainians trust their inner circle, their friends, right? And their
Mm-hmm.
family, the people closest to them. I know you have some recent survey work on polarization and religious groups because
Yeah.
Ukraine has a lot more religious diversity than people realize. So maybe you'd like
Yeah.
to speak a bit about how trust is between, or polarization, not trust maybe, but
Yes.
polarization between religious groups.
It's a nice segue. I actually also wanted to say something about polarization now, because compared to other societies, in many Western societies in the United States and Western Europe, there is this story of polarization, that there are different groups of people and they have opposite views. Like we are pro-guns or anti-guns, I don't know, taxes or anti-taxes, pro-migrants, anti-migrants, Democrats, Republicans. In Ukraine, for many years, we observed something else. We call it ambivalence, not polarization,
Mm.
because what we see is that the same people might have conflicting worldviews. We see that the same people in surveys can say that they are pro-democracy, but at the same time, they support authoritarian, strong leadership.
That's interesting.
The
Yeah.
same people can say they are for economic reforms and capitalism is nice. And then they say, we don't want privatization.
It's like a cognitive dissonance,
Yes, and for
kind
many
of.
years,
Yeah.
scholars like kind of, again, ideologically criticized Ukrainian society, like, oh, you don't know what you want. Yeah, it's sort of this kind of story that the society is
Yeah.
not mature enough. You can read it on Facebook very often. Oh, the society is not mature. And yeah, and it means that there is no this kind of polarization. Yeah, so we also had this ideological compass survey when we asked people about 24 items, economic or lifestyle regulations. Economic regulations, like, do you agree that the government has to give pensions or free education? Or it's either regulation or liberty. It's complete market. Everything is on competitive market. And the
Mhm.
same was about the scale, about personal life. Either it's drug marijuana usage, prohibit or allowed, or
Mhm.
graffiti, art or garbage. So we asked a lot of questions like that. And we compared people that most of them, the predominant, like more than 70% of Ukrainians, were, kind of prohibiting everything, regardless of the topic. Like, it's better to prohibit things than to allow things.
Okay.
So let's go back to the idea of security. Yeah,
Right.
security is
Right.
important. And then we saw that people were, some of them supported Zelensky and some of them supported Poroshenko. Some of them were on the left-right scale. They all were in the middle because they are indifferent. They don't really know.
Yeah.
And they were from different regions of Ukraine and different social statuses. So again, I think it's about maturity and experience. A lot of people in Ukraine, we live in society that emerged after the collapse of Soviet Union. It's only 30 years of society, and we went through many difficult years of economic transformation and then wars. So a lot of people, they don't really have this strong political beliefs. So
Yeah.
they care for something immediate, like my friends, my family, security, and and you can debate bad and good things.
Mhm.
Bad things is that this society is not engaged with, political debates. It's difficult to mobilize them. They can vote for populists, yeah, because you can exploit society when it's not mature. But the good thing is that society is, it is in progress. It's in state of shaping itself. So people can vote for bad politicians, but they also can vote for good politicians. And also there is no polarization, meaning that, and this is, I have argued it for many times, there is a stereotype that Ukraine is divided society. I think it's completely false.
Mm.
Ukraine is not divided because we are this ambivalent, yeah? We don't know what we and the good
Yeah.
thing that there is no polarization, which means that people can come together and do things together. Despite all these stereotypes, people can come together and do things together. And you see during this invasion, people from
Right.
different parts of Ukraine, people who speak Russian language and Ukrainian language, people who go to Greek Catholic or Orthodox Church, apparently they can be mobilized around the idea of protecting the government and state for some reason. In a polarized society, you would not expect it.
Right. Which is
Polarized,
pretty
yeah,
remarkable and unique
yeah,
about Ukraine that you're not seeing that kind of division amongst those
yeah.
groups.
And it's still a puzzle. We still don't know why sometimes Ukrainians are mobilized and sometimes not. We know
Right.
that Ukrainians are kind of this indifferent mass of people with no strong political attitudes. And sometimes they vote for charismatic leaders, but sometimes they are mobilized to defend their nation.
Right.
And to predict when they're going to do, something incredible and inspirational, or sometimes they do something stupid, we don't know. We don't know how to predict it, how to disentangle when the
Yeah.
indifferent mass of people can be mobilized in something good. Yeah. From
Yeah.
the perspective of public policy. Yeah. If you want to model public policy, it's very difficult because you don't know whether Ukrainians will support it or not. Yesterday, they say they don't like privatization. Today, they say, well, land privatization is fantastic. Yesterday, they say we don't trust government. Today, they're fighting to death to defend government.
Right.
So,
Right.
but at
Well, so
least
this
we
it
know.
speaks to
Yeah.
one of the questions we have in the chat. So Andy Lennox has posed this question of how Ukraine fares compared to other newly democratized or even long democratized countries. So how they stand in comparison to others. And do you think based on all this that Ukraine's headed in the right direction as far as a stable evolutionary development of a democracy?
Yeah, I think there are still risks. I think when society is in this, unstable shape, it can go to any direction. And I think now we should talk not only about society, not only about culture and values, but also about institutions. I think institutions as stable organizations and law and role models, they are important because they can direct and govern society in specific directions. And democratic institutions, I think, in all world are fragile. We see it from, populist movements in Western world, that democracy can be rolled back easily. So I think Ukraine has a chance to become a sustainable democracy as long as we support democratic institutions. And right now we have, good and bad examples. during the war, it's very difficult to have elections. So we won't have elections anytime soon. But at the same time, we don't have elections, but we have politics. So
Yeah.
parliament still is working. Cabinet government is still working. So there are processes
People get
that
dismissed sometimes. Zelensky has dismissed high-level
yeah.
people.
So there is rotation. Yeah. So there
Yeah.
are risks. Also, the same is about media. So some people would say that we still have freedom of media, but other people would criticize that the government has a very, they have this united marathon of media, which is kind of
Mm.
under influence of Ukrainian office of president. So there are, again, this kind of narrow corridor of, how to find something good in this situation in the war. But my major point is that as long as we pair culture with good institutions, then democracy can happen and can be sustainable. But if both things go wrong, the culture is not so well. If the culture remains this kind of unstable, and if institutions are not pro-democratic, I think Ukraine can go backwards from democracy.
Yeah.
So and that's why, I sincerely believe in the role of university. I work in university, and I believe that university is one of these institutions that can be pro-democratic because we are from freedom of speech. We can say things when other people are afraid. Let's say I can launch a debate about Russian versus Ukrainian language, migration, or critique of the government because university is a legit platform to do that, and we
Hmm.
should do that. And also university is about human capital and raising generations of people. So university is also important pro-democratic institution, and we need to defend universities. Yeah,
Right.
so compared to other countries, post-Soviet countries, I think Ukraine is relatively good because of this long history of competition. We have competition in media, in governance, in civil society, cross-regional competition. So it's much, much better than in some other countries, but still things are fragile. And if we lose democratic institutions, our cultural inertia can bring us backwards from democracy easily.
We have a question about institutions, and Mikhail Filipov has been patiently waiting for us to get to this, a hypothetical question of whether or not there are alternative visions of future political systems in Ukraine after the war. And Mikhail asked, for example, in your view, is there a chance for a federal Ukraine? I have thoughts
Yeah.
about that, but you're the featured guest, or a parliamentary republic with a weak president. But right now, I think there's no discussion of these things. But I guess the question is, like, looking forward, is there any possibility?
Yeah, I think, it's a hypothetical scenario. Yeah. So
Right.
let's think about hypothetically positive scenario when, the war is over, Ukraine gets the territory back and gets some economic reparations. I think it would be relatively easy to restore uh, the ongoing process. So we'll have parliament, we'll have president, and we'll go back to normal, except there will be new faces, charismatic leaders, military people will be in politics, things like that. I don't think that there is some organic need for any change, like federal Ukraine. I don't think there is even a question. So
Yeah.
I think there is a stereotype that Ukraine is divided. So federalism is like a response to this stereotype, oh, let's give eastern
Yeah.
parts to Russian speakers
Yeah.
and western parts to Ukrainian
Autonomy and
speakers.
yeah,
Yeah,
but yeah.
there is no real organic need for that. I think it's just more consequence of the long stereotypical kind of presentation of Ukraine. But let's consider negative, pessimistic scenarios. What if, for some reason, we live in this long war when we don't know if it's going to end or not? Or what if not all territories will be received back and we'll have some ceasefire waiting for the next Russian attack? Then I think it still will not be about federalism. I think the real conversation will be about the role of president, because back in history of Ukraine, we had these changes back and forth. Is it just a presidential republic with president the
Right.
main guy? It is a parliamentary republic with... So people will debate about that. And I think people will debate the role of decentralization, which I mentioned, because on the
Right.
one, decentralization created a lot of communities and independence. But during the war, you want to have more centralization, and you can say like, look, a lot of chaos, and we need to centralize security, budget, military spending, everything. Let's forget about decentralization. Yeah. So I think the real debates will be about that. And here, I can say my own ideological, personal things. I think that decentralization is good, and I would like to keep it. So even in the negative, pessimistic scenarios, as a citizen, I would advocate for decentralization.
Yeah. Well, and related to that local level, we have a couple good questions. One from Brock, who asked about if improvements in corruption had improved and restored trust. And I would tack on to that. I'd love to know your thoughts about that at the local level, if improvements in corruption have had an effect on trust. And then Natasha Wanchik is also asking about the role of activists across the country who publicize and are vocal about local and regional decisions and policies that are questionable. So very much related
Sure.
decentralization. And her example is activists from Bakhmut, now in Dnipro, Sumy, Berzhany. Are these local examples helpful to the bigger picture you're talking about related to transparency and building trust? And so I would kind of package those together almost, that this is about like local level processes, like perceptions
Yep.
about corruption and trust.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, well, again, it's a debate. It's chicken or egg, whether trust improves government and policy, or it's policy
Right.
that makes our life better, and then we start trust government. It's difficult to measure, so I'll say with caution. My belief is that indeed it was an improvement in performance of the government after
Mhm.
the Euromaidan, after 2014. Several reforms happened at the same time, and they had this cumulative effect. And sometimes people don't talk about these reforms because they are boring, but they
Yeah.
are crucial.
Administrative and yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So let's say procurement. Procurement, if you don't know, is public procurement was like 30% of Ukrainian GDP. It's crazy.
yeah,
It's a lot of money.
yeah,
And procurement means that, like in hospital, you have to buy gasoline, or you work in some state bureau administration and you need to buy a car. So what do? You buy gasoline from your nephew. You buy a car from a shady dealer and they give money in your pocket. And sometimes it's about pencils and paper. And but
like really
you
the
can,
technical nitty-gritty things though.
yeah,
Yeah.
but you can
Yeah.
steal a lot of money if you buy pencils from,
If you
shady
charge way
guys.
too much for them or yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So what happened is that procurement was digitalized and put in auctions. I don't want to sugarcoat it. It's still not perfect. Corruption still exists because you can trick the auction, you can bring um, someone, like you can manipulate the way how you make announcement. Like, uh, you know, smart people know how to circumvent the system, but still, the corruption has improved. The situation with corruption has improved significantly. Another, we kind of tend to forget about it, but there was a significant police reform with new staff, the court reform. Like a lot of Ukrainians hate like courts and judges and everything, but there was a big change. A lot of things, a lot of prosecutors were fired and hired from the scratch. So there were a lot of things happening at this local level when procurement changed. Decentralization allowed new city mayors to come. New institutions were launched from the scratch, or people got fired. A lot of people from business or civil activists arrived to these offices. I remember when I was younger, everything happened at the level, like everything interesting, like, yellow pages and scandals and everything was at the
Yeah.
level of president and parliament. Like if you want to build a career in Ukraine, you have to be in the parliament
Yeah.
because that's where you shine on TV. And once you get to the parliament, then you can make a political appointment. Like you become a minister of something because you belong to the political party. Like If you have the majority
Right.
in political party, you establish your people. My person will be the Minister of Justice, Minister of Economy, minister. So it's called political appointment. But
Hmm.
after Euromaidan, it became more technocratic. So the government became more sexy and attractive. So people from business, from civil activism, people with PhD, they wanted to work in the
Yeah.
government. Not exactly ministers, but vice minister of that, deputy minister of that. So I think a lot of governmental capacity has increased. And we
Well, and
see,
it's noted. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
yeah, and we see it in surveys. So there are studies
Mhm.
by Ukrainian and international scholars, Graham Robertson from
Yeah.
Northern Carolina University, he studied that. So he showed that, there was increased perception and trust towards police. That really
Yeah.
happened. And we saw the increase in local governance again. So I think but to answer to the second question, local activists were crucial because local activists received tools to monitor and to speak up. Like these digital auctions, there are many NGOs who exist specifically to monitor procurement at the local level. Local media, like local media on Telegram and Twitter became very important. Uh, Local activism has increased. So yes, civil society has become more and more, and also the war, which started in 2014 and the Crimea, it also created this new wave of NGOs who were working on transparency, disinformation, fakes, but also absorbing international help. Like, oh, World Bank is here to help us to develop like policy with internally displaced people. Yeah. So
Right.
local NGOs now emerge to work with these projects. So I think step by step, the capacity of NGO and activism has increased as well. COVID and pandemic were big for this local activism because there was this big fight between national government and local government. President Zelensky, national government, basically they say it's pandemic. We need to close local markets, local
Yeah.
gyms, local transport. But local city mayors, they have a lot of local trust and local, stakeholders.
And
And
this sounds like normal democracy everywhere, where there's
yeah,
a central government, it's
yeah.
managing, and there's differences at the subnational level.
Yeah, I remember there were like
Yeah.
maybe 5 city mayors who created an alliance, to fight against the president during the COVID. So yeah, so politics was very intense at the level of local level, and even in military situation, one of the legal changes which Zelensky's team was working on is to create this, give more power to this local local volunteer regiments that
Right.
territorial defenses. Yeah, so people can sign up to defend their community and receive weapons. They did not come up with this idea, but they kind of they worked with it and they finalized it. Yeah, even
Right.
though the previous politicians also worked with this idea. So it's difficult to say who is responsible for what. There were so many changes in political, cabinets. But cumulatively, after 2014, so many things changed with activists and government and business that cumulatively it improved both performance and perception.
Right. And I'm glad you mentioned this because what's also remarkable is this decentralization that happened. It started in 2014. It took a number of years before it was fully completed, but
Yeah.
it started after the invasion of part of Donbass and the illegal annexation of Crimea, so that Ukraine did this. Why do you think that local politics became more important and they proceeded with decentralization?
Yeah, well,
Given the other challenges, usually in wartime or any kind of conflict, you see centralization, not
yeah,
decentralization.
but I mean, again, I don't want to sugarcoat it. I think that sometimes things happen without design and intention. Like this year, the Nobel Prize was given to these scholars in institutional economy, who
Hmm.
basically show that the institutions brought by colonizers, they were not always by design. It just happened
Right.
that it was more convenient to give to create institutions to protect land, just so it would be more convenient to go to North America. They did not think about democracy back then. They just created some institutions, but after 200 years, apparently these institutions now create democracy. And I think
Right.
similar things happened in after Euromaidan. There was a group of activists who created this idea of digital auctions in procurement. And they worked in IT, and they were just activists. And they said, like, look, guys, Euromaidan happened. The Russia is attacking us. We have this
Yeah.
narrow window of opportunity. We want to change something. Let's do change. And my own interpretation, maybe I sound a bit silly. This is my own interpretation. I think that the government back then and political elites back then did not care. They did not understand what public procurement
Right.
auction means. Like they thought, like some kids from IT are playing with their digital toys, and it will be about paper procurement. Okay, let them be. Let's satisfy a few donors from USAID who want to give them money.
Yeah.
Then after some time, they became so big and important and legalized, so you cannot avoid them anymore. And if you touch them, the whole world will attack you for being non-democratic. So I think some reforms changed because there were a lot of activists, like from IT, from
Yeah.
business, who really sincerely believed in the idea, but no one really knew what's going to happen. It just happened magically, almost by accident in this narrow corridor, and it works.
I guess
Yeah,
I see more of a positive narrative there because if you look at the Russian IT community, they have been very much co-opted by the state and they're very much in like the Russian state is invested in internet trolling and that kind of like cyber attacks on, and not just trolling, but like cyber attacks on energy power infrastructure and energy grids and things like that. But the Ukrainian IT sector was like, let's set up competitive public procurement, right? Like that seems to me like this very stark, notable difference in cultures
yeah,
that you
yeah,
have
because
one
people in
that's really been
IT,
co-opted
yeah,
by the authoritarians, and the other
yeah,
is like, no, we're going to facilitate democracy as part of a
yeah.
local like effort in part.
Yeah, I think it's just in some areas of business, people used to work in global markets, and
Yeah,
if you work in international market and you know what public procurement is, you
right.
you want to bring this to your country. You say like, look, guys, I'm tired. Why should in my office, everything is smooth, but when I work with the government, it doesn't work. So I
It's
want to
right. It
copy
can be
paste
better.
something
Yeah,
and bring it to government.
yeah.
And so many things like that happened. Like I in national bank. Oh, it was a crucial reform. Half of the banks were just shut down, after Euromaidan. A lot of people forget about that, but half of the banks were shut down because there were money laundering machines. And there was this narrow window of opportunity when a person was appointed and she was brave enough and she did it. And back then, when the Russia attacked in 14, 15, the Ukrainian economy collapsed. It was a huge, huge, huge problem
Right,
with
right.
macroeconomy, with exchange rates. The dollar to hryvnia went crazy. But when the full-scale invasion happened, the economy did not collapse at the same level, even though the
Yeah.
full-scale invasion was much, much bigger and much, much more terrible. And the answer is that after Euromaidan, National Bank, Ministry of Economy, Ministry of Finance became more credible, more smart, more reformed, with better people, with better policies. And they became more, I don't want to sugarcoat it. I don't want to say that everything is perfect, but they became more prepared. So even the shock of invasion did not um, have the same
Didn't
effect
interrupt
as
the
in
economy.
2015. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, no, so we're getting close to amazingly, we're close to the end of the hour, but we have two really good questions in the Q&A. One, I think is a natural extension of this is from Valentine Stutz. How have demographics across Ukraine shifted since the start of the full-scale invasion? What impact has the mass evacuation of Ukrainians citizens to safer regions across the country or to neighboring countries had on the economy and society in general? And I would tack on to this. I'd love to hear you talk about like how you get people to come back because this seems to be the big debate already is
Yeah.
they're aware, like what does Ukraine do to get people back? What is it
Yeah.
you started the conversation with the lack of human capital? Like there just aren't enough people.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
Yeah, it's the situation is really bad. So after the invasion, more than
yeah,
10 million people were moved. We still don't have good data because people move back and forth. Approximately, if we accept that 10 million people moved, then 4 of them are abroad, like Germany, Poland, but also Italy, Spain, United States, Canada, and 6 moved, were displaced to other places in Ukraine. It's with the displacement, we have new experience because back in 2014, we already had displaced people from Crimea,
yeah,
from Donetsk, from
yeah.
Luhansk, but these displaced people moved more to large urban areas, to Kyiv, to Kharkiv,
Mhm.
to Lviv. So, okay, they were displaced, but they lived in the urban area with labor market, with kindergartens, with schools. Yeah? Now it's different. People move to whatever is convenient, whatever is close. People went to villages, towns, cities. Also, some people, they don't move to nice locations. They move to some camps that were built by international NGOs or something like that, like um, temporarily camp or something like that.
Yeah.
So after 2.5 years, things were reshaped a bit. People moved first to a village just to wait out and sit there. But after 6 months, now they go to a bigger city because they need a job or something like that. So, and this is unique situation. In contrast to many other migration examples, war migration, civil conflict migration, or natural disaster migration, very often people move like in steps, but in
Yeah.
Ukraine people move back and forth, so it's unusual. And second, regarding the external migration,
Mhm.
in, in comparison to examples like Syria or Afghanistan, most of Ukrainians who are abroad, they are more skilled and educated, and it creates gaps. On the one hand, it's difficult for them to find, like, they have self-perception, like I'm a skilled person, but now I'm in this new society. So what do I do? And people are divided. Some people go back to Ukraine. They say, well, I cannot fit to this new society. I cannot change my lifestyle, so I'll go back to Ukraine. And some people, they want to stay for the safety of their kids and their relatives, and but it's difficult to them for find job because okay, you can be an engineer or a doctor, but it doesn't mean that they will give you job immediately. But so they have to lower their expectations and work maybe in some blue collar jobs or something like that. And it means that people live there, people survive, but people have this emotional stress and social stress, like, should I stay here? Should I go home? What about my kids? So it creates a lot of stress and uncertainty in general. There are surveys, and what we know from surveys is that there are two main variables that influence decisions. Again, very simple, security and jobs. Like if there
Yeah.
is a prospect of perceived security and perceived jobs in Ukraine, they will go back. We know from surveys that the percentage of people who are confident that they go back has declined. In the beginning, people were very optimistic. I'm here only for a couple months, I'll back to Ukraine. Now, this like 60, 70% said that they will go back immediately. Now, like 30% of people say they will go back immediately, so it has declined. Yeah, and in Ukraine, there is a stagnation at the labor market that given that so many people moved and given that people were mobilized as volunteers or by the state, there is indeed a lack of human capital, jobs, we don't have, no, I will rephrase
Yeah.
what I want to say. It's a situation that in economics, people call it a structural gap or structural mismatch, meaning that we have jobs and we have money to pay for these jobs. And we also have people in Ukraine who are looking for a job. But you cannot easily connect them because people don't have skills.
Oh. It's that people don't have the right skills for the jobs that
Yes,
exist. There's a
yes,
mismatch.
yeah. So for instance, we need tractor drivers, but we don't have a lot of people who know how to drive a tractor
Yeah.
because these people were displaced from, let's say, Kharkiv, and they used to work in uh, some industry. But now they live in Western Ukraine and they have to work in agriculture, and they don't know how, they don't have the skills. Or females, they were not trained in our society to drive tractors. So now you have to create these special educational programs. So
So
what
vocational training, right? That's the
vocational training, yeah.
vocational training. We're right at at the end of the hour. But I'm sorry to interrupt you. If you
Yeah,
want
yeah,
to,
I can, well, let's say it's okay for me to continue for 10, 15 more
yeah,
minutes.
yeah,
Okay, for
please. You
your
and I
audience.
want to because I want to squeeze in one more question from
Yeah.
Pavel if we have a minute. But yeah.
Yeah, I'll finish this point. So to give you a sense of what people are talking about in Kyiv, in government and business, vocational training is important. Everyone is talking about vocational training, and even ourselves as a university, we're launching some programs in vocational training. And we do research to understand what kind of jobs are needed, and we know it's blue collar works and the training is needed. So I will stop here.
That's interesting because I don't think that people know that about Ukraine by and large today, that vocational training is the big discussion because of these demographic changes and because of the war that's what's happening. Pavel Bachowski has a great, I can't resist because it's such a great political science question, and I'm a political scientist. What does the party landscape look like in Ukraine right now? Even if we look just at the parties in the Rada, what is their underlying health? Would they be able to supply viable candidates and options for voters when the next election eventually occurs, or has the war eroded that? So, okay, you
Yeah,
have to predict the political future for this one.
yes. Well, given that we have a lot of uncertainty, I can certainly say that there will be uncertainty again and again.
Yeah.
Before the invasion, we had this unprecedented case that the political party Servant of the People, Sluga Narodu, they received the majority in Ukrainian parliament. First ever in our history, there was a majority that you don't care about coalition. Your own party can vote for the most crucial, important laws without coalition. However, the problem emerged almost immediately. It is within party disagreement. There was no unity in the party, so it was difficult to make them vote for something. And there was a lot of, kind of media investigation, journalists, and you can always detect subgroups, subclusters, like, oh, these guys are voting for the interest of one political group, and these guys are voting against this interest. So there was a lot of movement. And I think during the invasion, we see that this has exacerbated. So some members of the dominant party, they actually, there are cases that people escape from the country. Or if we go into the opposition, there are cases of members of parliament who were radically kind of pro-Russian, and they were almost like Russian agents, and they were either arrested or they were traded with Russia for the prisoners. So I think in the future,
Yeah.
Netflix will make a lot of crazy TV shows about this political system. But my point is that the number of members in parliament officially declined because someone escaped, someone is in Russia, someone is actually volunteer and fight, or they went as volunteer to military, but then they came back to the parliament, so there are different situations.
Yeah.
So the people are fewer than we had, and the disagreements within the party has increased. So I believe that the predominant party, well, it will break in some groups. And now talking about possible future, we can speculate. I think that uh, there will be, I think every political party, whoever it will be, predominant or opposition, pro-NATO, European Union, or some sort of anti-NATO, whatever party there will be on the landscape, I think they will try to recruit military people. Because as we already know from surveys, military and volunteers are the most, and church, three most trusted institutions. So you must have someone from this groups on the screen in your party as decision makers, etc. So I envision that some people speculate. So right now in Ukraine, there is a speculation that there will be a new political party only for military, like party of generals or something like that. But I believe it will be more that each political party will recruit one general, sort of to strengthen their position and public perception.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, I think another thing which will be different is a predominant discourse. Before in Ukraine, the cleavages were clear, pro-NATO versus anti-NATO, But now it seems that the whole population overwhelmingly pro-European Union, pro-NATO, anti-Russian. So how will you differentiate yourself? What are you going to fight for? So I think the parties will be, maybe, it's my speculation, maybe we will have ideological parties, left versus right.
Right.
I think there will be parties that will address social issues, like we have a lot of veterans, we have a lot of military, we have a lot of people who suffered from the war, rebuilding, people who lost their homes. So there will be call for this kind of, well-being, socialistic attitude kind of the state has to provide, versus kind of pro-European Union, liberal market, let's open up for competition and market will solve our problem. These are two radical positions. And I think there is a lot of space in between of these positions. So the parties will try to exploit these socioeconomic grievances post-war.
Right. It seems no matter what happens, it'll be very different. Inevitably, just given the circumstances of what's happened. We are 6 minutes past the hour by my clock, at least. There is, if you'd like to give a quick answer, to Marta Schiffer has asked if you have any comment to the BRIC summit that just happened.
Oh, look, I don't have any insight. I just watched the news. I know it happened, and I know that people in Ukraine are pissed, and for a few reasons, that BRICS does exist and that it favors Russia and that
Yeah.
Putin has this international platform to speak about his agenda. Also, there is this controversy with a person from United Nations who was there kind of in person. And of course, Ukrainians take it very negatively and pessimistically. There is a feeling that the West, multiply it or add to that there are elections in the United States and we don't know what's going to happen and what will be the
Yeah.
policy of the United States. So it just gives here inside of Ukraine a lot of uncertainty about, are we going to be supported by the West or not? It also creates the view of world polarization, like people are talking about like World War III or this division between, like good versus evil, sort of the whole world democracy versus all authoritarian populistic regimes. I don't say that that's what's going to happen. I'm saying like Ukrainians tend to perceive it. And I actually would be, it's again, my own speculation. I think it's kind of bad for, so what I want to say is that it seems that despite all of the risks, there is still a significant number of Ukrainians who are committed to stay in Ukraine and fight for the country.
Yeah.
I understand that this sounds cynical and I cannot speak about other people and you cannot predict the future, but it seems that in majority, there is a critical mass of Ukrainians who will remain in Ukraine. And it seems that these people feel that they are abandoned by the world. And
Yeah.
it may push people into dark place, like polarization against the world. Like we are here when Ukraine, no one supports us, but we will stay here and we will fight against Russia. Yeah? It sounds to me like, it's not a good picture. It's something, bad things can happen out of this kind of architecture. I don't know how to call it, but I just think that it's imperative for Ukraine and Ukrainians to feel that they are supported and that they are the members of the global world that supports them. So they won't have this anti-democratic backlash. I think that you can actually create anti-democratic, anti-globalistic, anti-Western backlash because Ukrainians will feel like we are abandoned, we are here alone fighting against Russia, and we have no other choices but use means at our disposal, and people can get, I don't know, crazy about it. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's very well said. And to echo one of our attendees who noted in the Q&A, this speaker has been outstanding. So I think that's, I mean, really, I think that's, I hate that we have to end, but I think it is a very insightful note to end on. And to thank you again for coming to talk to us about this today. We have an audience that's very engaged and cares a lot in knowing more about what's really going on in Ukraine and what people think. So tremendous, tremendous thank you to you for doing this today.
Yeah.
And all our support and best of luck seems too glib to say with your work at the Kyiv School of Economics and with everything you do, but all our support and appreciation for the work that you're doing on a day-to-day basis. So thank you. Дуже дякую.
Дуже дякую вам. Thank you so much. And as I said,
And
support.
lots of nice comments in the Q&A. We have a thank you, absolutely agree, outstanding. Thank you so much, tremendous insights. So yes, very appreciative audience.
Yeah, thank you all. And as I said, support matters. So thank you for your support. It's really tangible. So thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you to our attendees. We'll see you next week. We have Tara speak next week from the Agency for Recovery and Development. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Thank you again,
Bye.
Dr. Brik. Thank you.